First I rise to my highest heights, giving all praises due to Allah. I give honor to all true and divine prophets, including Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Confucius, and Prophet in these days and times, our Prophet Noble Ali. I extend those honors to all Asiatics and Muslims. I'm Sheik Dingle-EL. Peace. So today we're gonna switch traction and we're gonna look at the resurrection book. So I'm gonna ask for a reader so we can get through this. In the resurrection book written by Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL, it was entitled Letter of Communication Sent to All So-Called Black Senators, January 29th, 1972, on page 123. So if you have your resurrection book available, you can follow along. Do I have a volunteer to read?
Islam, Sheik. I'm available.
Islam, Muslim. All right, so we're gonna start on page 123.
Islam. First I rise to my highest height, giving proper praise to Father Allah. Give honors to all prophets, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Confucius, and the prophet of these last days and time, Prophet Noble Ali. We all y'all in peace. My name is Jeffrey Dingle-EL. All right, page 123 after resurrection. His ears are open to the. You want to just get right to the reading, or just read everything out?
You could start by reading from the Supreme Grand Resurrection. You could read on down.
Okay. All right. The Supreme Grand Resurrection, Complete Department for the Moorish Science Temple of America, Incorporated. Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL, Director. Got his phone number, address 3911 Bell Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland, 21215, January 29th, 1971. Greeting.
Wait, hang on 1 second. So let me put a little context to this, okay? So Grand Sheik,
it's long. And don't read so fast more, so people could get this. All right, it's long,
okay.
Piece.
It's long. So we're gonna put this into context, all right? We're gonna analyze Timothy Dingle-EL's words to the members of Congress to understand his perspective on the policy of Abraham Lincoln, the Reconstruction Amendments, and what needs to be done. Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL goes into all of this in this particular letter. So let's take a look at it.
It's long. Greeting, brethren. This is the voice of the executive rulers of our adept chamber. Please let this be known to all men that we are deeply concerned that you and your associate walk out on our president, Friday, January 22nd, 1971.
All right, so hold on, wait. So I didn't look this up to verify, but evidently it was an event that transpired where the Black Caucus of Congress decided to walk out on the president, according to Timothy Dingle-EL's word. I didn't verify to see if this historical event took place, but that's what he's talking about.
Okay. We are resting assured that it was done because of a misunderstanding. And it is our desire that you have an understanding that you can clarify others. It is in our opinion that you and associates are using the said 13th and 14th, 15th Amendment for our salvation.
So let's stop right there. So that 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment that he's referencing is known as the Reconstruction Amendments, okay? Now, when we get later on into the reading, we're gonna establish that when he's saying this sentence here, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, he's referencing the 13th Amendment with 2 sections. Simple common sense will be able to tell you that he's referencing 2 sections. How would we know that he's talking about 2 sections? Well, how many sections did the 13th Amendment have in 1971? What was the United States of America operating off of in terms of sections in the 13th Amendment? How many existed? 2. All right, the same as they recognize in today. All right, so he's saying that they're using right now the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. All right, so let's continue.
If you follow this instruction mentioned in the small booklets, you will discover that it was void by the court. We are wondering why that our spokesman of that time didn't make that known through our educational system.
Okay,
Also,
so hold on, wait, let's stop right. That's very important. He not only said that these were voided, he said that they were voided by the court. Now, if somebody, I don't know if Sheik Muhammad or Sheik Sadiq have the resurrection, not the resurrection, the Negro, the Black, the Moor handy, but if you can find the page where case 109 US 3, we could cross-reference that. So not only did he say that it was voided, he explained that it was voided by the court, the 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments. Okay, that is mentioned in the pamphlet that they had originally received. All right, so let's continue.
and also advise us to go by the policy of our President Abraham Lincoln. President Abraham Lincoln's successor tried to carry it out, but couldn't get the cooperation of our leader and spokesman of that time, Frederick Douglass.
Okay, so who's President Abraham Lincoln's successor? We was talking for whoever was at the meeting, not the meeting, but before we started the meeting, we were congregating earlier. Who was President Abraham Lincoln's successor? In other words, who was the immediate president after him?
Andrew Johnson.
It's long. That's it. President Andrew Johnson. During President Abraham Lincoln's administration, Andrew Johnson was the vice president. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, I believe it was April 14th, or maybe it was April 9th, one of those two. I get those 2 days confused. Because one of them is starting the Civil War, and the other one's when he's assassinated 4 years later, or 3 years later. No, 4 years later. But in April, President Abraham Lincoln's assassinated, and then based on the emergency powers granted under the Constitution, the vice president took office at that time. Islam. This was the first. I want to point out. I'm gonna pass it to you right now, Sheik. I want to point out this is the first in a lot of instances during this period. The first president to be assassinated is President Abraham Lincoln. All right. There was the first bill to ever be vetoed by a president was in 1866, President Andrew Johnson, who was the successor of Abraham Lincoln. And third, the first president to be impeached. All this happened within a span of a year, 2 years, was Andrew Johnson. He was the first president ever to be impeached. And the next time impeachment is ever brought up is Richard Nixon. And we know why that was needed. But he wasn't impeached, but they tried to impeach him. Then following after that, you have Clinton and then Trump. Okay, so we have to put into context a lot of this is going on. Sheik Muhammad, he had something that he wanted to add on or ask or something. Sheik Muhammad, you have the floor.
Islam, you wanted this case from the Negro, the Black, the Moor, page 28.
Right. Thank you. If you could read the pertinent information, because I can't see it right now. I just have the resurrection in front of me. So if you could, please, share that.
It has the actual document, so you will have to give me. All right. I'll read some excerpts pertaining to the subject.
Try to just whatever pertinent information specifically to the amendments and them being held void. So he's reading. He's reading an excerpt from a court case, 109 US 3. It was a case of 1883 that was pertaining to a number of civil rights cases that was taking place at that time. All right, Sheik Muhammad, if you will.
Islam. So the next couple of sentences that I will read will give the backdrop of how these cases came up, and then we're going to directly look at how they pertain to the amendments in the next paragraph. These were 5 cases appealed from different circuit courts involving the validity and interpretation of the Civil Rights Act of March 1st, 1875, docket number 291. In each case, a colored person had been denied some accommodation or privilege on account of color. The opinion of the court that the rights which this law attempted to protect were social rather than civil rights, and that the federal government had no jurisdiction over these matters, particularly put to an end to the effort of the federal government to enforce the guarantees of the 14th Amendment. Now we're going to continue on. This is postulated by Bradley J. after holding that the statute derived no support from the 14th Amendment. It is true that slavery cannot exist without law any more than property and lands and goods can exist without law. And therefore, the 13th Amendment may be regarded as nullifying all state laws which establish or uphold slavery. But it has a reflex.
Hold on, wait. Let's slow down. The 13th Amendment could be perceived as what? Like nullifying. That's the word that struck me. Nullifying, yes. Which is another way of saying voiding.
Void. That's long.
All right. So let's continue. So, wait, before we continue, that's why I was going back to the excerpt that we read, where Brother Jeff had stated that you will discover that it was void by the court, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. So this is why Sheik Muhammad is reading this excerpt from this case that is contained in the literature, The Negro, the Black, the Moor. Islam, please continue, Sheik.
Islam. But it has a reflex character also, establishing and decreeing universal civil and political freedom throughout the United States. It is assumed that the power in Congress to enforce the articles by appropriate legislation clothes Congress with power to pass all laws necessary and proper for abolishing all badges and incidents of slavery in the United States. And upon this assumption, it is claimed that this sufficient authority for declaring by law that all persons shall have equal accommodations and privileges in all inns, public conveyances, and places of public amusement. Now we'll continue on because they're
well, let's
using
slow down
a lot
for
of grandiloquence.
So what is that excerpt saying? What are they saying? They're saying that the Civil Rights Act, so there were, to my knowledge, 3 Civil Rights Acts in American history. The Civil Rights Act of 1866, the Civil Rights Act of 1875, and the Civil Rights Act of 1965? Legal was?
65. Ratified in 67.
So the first Civil Rights Act still held as law today. As we're reading, aspects of the Civil Rights Act of 1875 were ruled unconstitutional. Now, in my political science studies at John Jay College, I learned about the other 2, and specifically that the reason why there was a one in 1965 is because the one in 75 was insufficient. The one in 1866, what it lacked was voting rights, but it didn't provide what the court deemed social accommodations. Like the idea that a restaurant has to allow you to patronize there and that the government has some authority to enforce it. The court is saying no. The federal government does not have the authority and jurisdiction. Just because legislation says that appropriate legislation, the Congress is going to be able to enforce it through appropriate legislation, doesn't mean you have a blank check to just do whatever you want to do. Like it has to still be within the confines of constitutional laws. And so they basically said that it can't be done. They wound up figuring a way to manipulate it later, but that's a kind of complicated situation as how they were able to make the Civil Rights Act of 1965 effective and still have that effect. They utilized the state signing over their rights to basically do that. I don't want to go into too more detail because that's going to take us off on a tangent. We don't have a lot of time. So, Sheik Muhammad, you have any more? Yeah, because they just mentioned the 13th Amendment, the Civil Rights Act of 1875. So, they vote. So remember, void, he just read in the court case, they said nullified for the Civil Rights Act. Let's continue. And he's referencing the 13th Amendment as well. So let's continue.
Islam. The argument being that the denial of such equal accommodations and privileges in itself a subjection to a species of servitude within the meaning of the amendment, conceding the major proposition to be true, that Congress has a right to enact all necessary and proper laws for the obliteration and prevention of slavery, With all its badges and incidents, it is the minor proposition also true, that denial to any person of admissions to the accommodations and privileges of an inn in a public conveyance. If it does not, then power to pass the law is not found in the 13th Amendment. But is there any similarity between such servitudes and denial by the owner of an inn? Okay, they're reestablishing the same questions. Whether
So
it
they
might not
basically,
be.
yeah, they just saying this. Hold on, try to pinpoint a more specific to the. See if you can locate the words 14th and 15th Amendment, so we can just skip to that, and I'll explain that part. So again, it's going back to the matter.
I got you. I got two sections here on the page.
Well, let me just say this, and you can continue. So it's just a matter of, does the 13th Amendment and the fact that it says that Congress has the right to, create appropriate legislation, does it give them this authority to enforce on private citizens to make accommodations for people based on race and color or whatever have you? And that's the question that the court is asking. Does this 13th Amendment grant Congress that power? And they come to the conclusion that no, it does not. But Sheik Muhammad, he's going to read another excerpt. Islam, Sheik.
Islam. Whether it might not be a denial of a right, which if sanctioned by the state law would be obnoxious to the prohibitions of the 14th Amendment, is another question. But what it has to do with the question of slavery. And then you continue on, it speaks. If it is violate of any right of the party, his redress is to be sought under the laws of the state, or if those laws are adverse to his rights and do not protect him, his remedy will be found in the corrective legislation with Congress as adopted or may adopt for counteracting the effect of the states or state action, prohibited by the 14th Amendment. It would be running the slavery argument into the ground to make it apply to every act of discrimination which a person may see fit to make as the guest will be, which a person may see fit to make as to the guests he will entertain or as the people he will take into his coach.
All right, so I'm not sure if that's the exact excerpt, you know what I mean? Like I said, I don't have it in front of me. But to summarize what he just read, what they're talking about is essentially the 10th Amendment and states' rights. There's a way that this is supposed to go. And there's a remedy if the states are violating you, and that's when the congressional act is supposed to come into play. It's not supposed to just override states' rights. States have rights according to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, police powers. And so the federal government will be essentially encroaching on states' rights according to the Supreme Court decision. It will be encroaching on states' rights to allow the federal government in any particular. You could find a way to blame racism on any particular situation in society is what they're saying. I'm not saying that arguments are valid. I'm saying that the Supreme Court is the highest judicial authority in the land, and this is what they ruled, and this ruling has never been overturned. So, it still holds the fact of law, holds the power of law as all Supreme Court case law does. But I'm gonna let Muhammad look more over that document. If he finds anything relevant to the voiding of the 14th and 15th, we'll come back to that. But we're gonna continue on because I want to get through this letter and at least analyze Timothy Dingle-El's perspective. If you don't want to give him the benefit of the doubt of the voiding thing, and you don't want to look at the US 109, the 109 US 3 Supreme Court case, that's not the main emphasis of this particular demonstration anyway. So we could tackle that another time. But Brother Jeff, so we're gonna continue on. President Lincoln's successor. So Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-El made a claim that essentially that Andrew Johnson attempted to carry out the executive order of Abraham Lincoln, and because Frederick Douglass didn't, he couldn't get the cooperation of Frederick Douglass. Let's see what more he says about Frederick Douglass and Andrew Johnson.
Okay, Islam. Mr. Douglass tried to correct the error in 1866, but it was too late.
Okay, so stop right there. So in 1865, what Timothy Dingle-El is alleging is that President Johnson came to carry out the rest of Abraham Lincoln's policy, and Frederick Douglass wasn't with it in 1865, but he tried to correct it in 1866. We're going to reference, well, actually, let's just continue.
It's long. In his speech of May 9th, 1865, titled "The Need to Continue Anti-Slavery Work," he voided the true 13th Amendment.
So stop right there. So let's take a second to look at what he just said, okay? So first off, the sentence preceding it said Mr. Douglass was in error. So he made a mistake then, and he recognized that mistake and tried to correct it. So Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-El is giving him credit for attempting to correct his mistake. But his mistake in 1865, he's attributed that he had a speech on May 9th. And in that speech, he voided the true 13th Amendment. So that means that, is he saying that that Frederick Douglass voided the true 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the 13th Amendment with 20 sections, as we're going to see in a second, that Timothy Dingle-El agrees with, that the true 13th Amendment is with 20 sections. We're going to see that in a second, or in a few minutes, rather. But let's just analyze the statement, okay? Mr. Douglass voided the 13th Amendment. Can anybody who studies the Constitution tell me what's wrong with the interpretation of Douglass being able to void the 13th Amendment? I want to get an opportunity before I answer the question. It's a very simple answer. Your studies in moral science can make it real easy.
Islam.
Islam, Sheik.
Islam. According to the 5th article of the Constitution, one person cannot make up 2/3 of the several states. Therefore, it cannot be voided by one person. Islam.
Islam, real simple. The way that an amendment is passed, and consequently the way that you can remove an amendment, is going to be through Article 5 of the Constitution. For that amendment to be passed, it wasn't President Abraham Lincoln that said, this is the amendment and we're going by this law. The president signs and verifies it. 2/3 of both houses. First it goes to one house, then it goes to the other. Congress being a bicameral legislature, having two houses. Goes to one, it goes to the other. 2/3 vote on it and it passes, it moves on to the next house. 2/3 of that house votes on it and it passes, then it gets sent to the president. And the president either has two options. He can sign it into law or he can veto it. So in the case of the Civil Rights Act of 1866, as I said, it was the first time since 1787 or 89 or whatever the presidential power to veto came into play with the current Constitution. The first time it was ever used was immediately following the Civil War in 1866, when President Andrew Johnson vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. But there are clauses in the Constitution that allow a law to still pass. Okay, it gets reintroduced again. The president will veto it with his recommendations, and then it goes back to the same process again, essentially. And if the Congress in both houses confirm it again, it overrides the president's veto. And that's what happened in the case with Andrew Johnson. They overrided his veto, and then the Civil Rights Act of 1866 became law. Okay? And so the simplest answer in moral science, beyond, if you don't know nothing about the Constitution, if you wasn't familiar with the process of how laws are made, et cetera, and you might even have thought a person could actually veto, or not veto, excuse me, nullify or void a law that's been passed by 2/3 of both houses and ratified by 3/4 of the several states and signed off on by the president of the country. Even if you didn't, have that understanding, Frederick Douglass, in the eyes of the United States laws, was a Negro. How can a Negro who's not even a citizen have the power to hold void the laws of the United States? to void a constitutional law. You're not even a citizen. And so in 1866, they said it was the 14th Amendment. This is what they teach. The 14th Amendment overturned Dred Scott. Well, that was in 1868. Okay, 2-3 years later. So the 14th Amendment is not in place yet to make Frederick Douglass a so-called citizen. How could he void an amendment of a body politic of a government that he's not even a part of? So clearly, the adept, the constitutional master that Timothy Dingle-El was, he would clearly know that Frederick Douglass didn't have the power to void. So that's why I said pay attention to the other part, where he said it was void by the court in the previous paragraph, 13, 14, 15, void by the court. So he understood that the Supreme Court is what voids U.S. laws, who has the authority to void a law because it's unconstitutional. Clearly, he understood that by his previous paragraph. So what could he have possibly meant? My understanding and interpretation of this is simply that the spokesperson of the so-called Negro wasn't cooperative at the time. And so whatever progress that could have been made under that 13th Amendment, because they couldn't secure his cooperation, that progress wasn't made. Okay, but we're going to get, does Timothy Dingle-El think the 13th Amendment with 20 sections was legitimate? Does he think that this was the law that was supposed to be utilized to facilitate our freedom? Let's continue reading and let's find out.
It's long. Other amendments later was created to take advantage of just people who believed in what they think was right, because the Civil War was not fought for that. Does the Constitution of the United States have been...
All right, well, I want to gloss over that. So he's saying other amendments. He's talking about the 14th, 15th amendments were later created to take advantage of people who believe in what they think was right. What they think was right. Okay? So he's talking about the 14th and 15th Amendment, which completes the Reconstruction Amendments. All right, so let's continue.
1 second. So since the Constitution of the United States have been designed to defend the just and punish the unjust, after Mr. Frederick Douglass made his speech on May 9, 1865, President Andrew Johnson issued a Reconstruction Proclamation on May 29, 1865. Some of the notations are, whereas the President of the United States on the 8th day of December, AD 1863, and on the 26th day of March, AD 1864, did with the object to suppress the existing rebellion, to include all persons to return to their loyalty and to restore the authority of the United States, issue proclamations offering amnesty and pardon to certain persons who had directly or by implication participated in the said rebellion.
All right, let's stop right there. Hold on a second. So, by the way, it was to induce all persons to return to their loyalty. Okay, so he's referencing President Abraham Lincoln's proclamation, Oath of Amnesty and Reconstruction. Okay, so let's read what he says. He says to induce all persons to return to their loyalty, implying that they were disloyal to the United States. Okay, and to restore the authority of the United States, issue proclamations offering amnesty and pardon. All right. So this is a pardon. So the executives, and the head executives of each state and the head executive of the federal government have the power to pardon. All right, which means to forgive your crimes. All right. It's not that they find you innocent, but despite that, they give you reprieve from your punishment. Okay. So this is like, for example, one of the most famous cases of recent memory President Abraham Lincoln, not President Abraham Lincoln, okay. So Lil Wayne was caught maybe last year or the year before last sometime with guns on his plate, and he was charged. Okay, so he wasn't found guilty and he wasn't sentenced, but President Trump pardoned him for his charges. He also pardoned the rapper Kodak Black. Okay, so he utilized the constitutional power of presidential pardon, which presidents typically do at the end of their term in office, or typically if they expect a second term, maybe at the end of their second term, they release the people they really want to release. All right, so issue proclamations offer amnesty and pardon to certain persons. All right, so this was not an oath that was administered to all citizens who had directly or by implication participated in said rebellion. Said in law means before mentioned. So the before mentioned rebellion was the seceding from the United States and declaring war on the United States and joining the Confederacy. So you had to qualify under those conditions to take this oath. So let's continue.
Whereas many persons who had so engaged in said rebellion have, since the issuance of said proclamations, failed or neglected to take the benefits offered thereby. And whereas many persons who have been justly deprived of all claim to amnesty and pardon thereunder by reason of their participation, directly or by implication, is said rebellion and continue hostilities to the government of the United States since the date of said proclamations now desire to apply for and obtain amnesty and pardon. To the end.
All right, I'll continue.
Continue?
Yes.
Okay. To the end, therefore, that the authority of the government of the United States may be restored and the peace, order, and freedom may be established. Brethren, President Johnson walked in the footsteps of the late President Abraham Lincoln by saying and doing the following. I, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, do proclaim and declare that I hereby grant to all persons who have directly or indirectly participated in the existing rebellion, except as hereinafter, accepted amnesty and pardon with restoration of all right of property, except as to slaves.
Let's stop right there. Let's stop right there, because so let's tie some knots in real quick and then make some assertions based off of that. So when Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL is speaking about Andrew Johnson trying to carry out the rest of Abraham Lincoln, carry out the policy of Abraham Lincoln, that he made the attempt. This could be seen as that because why? This proclamation was issued under President Abraham Lincoln, not under President Andrew Johnson. He's reaffirming this proclamation. He's saying that on December 8th, 1863, and on the 26th day of March, 1864. So that was during President Abraham Lincoln's tenure. He was assassinated in April of 1865. So he issued this proclamation originally, not Andrew Johnson, President Abraham Lincoln. But some Moors believe that this proclamation was for the descendants of slaves. Okay, well, let's look at that. Participated in existing rebellion except as they herein accepted amnesty and pardon with restoration of all right of property. Did the Negro have a right to property in 1865? Prior to during the time of 1864, 1863, when this proclamation is issued, during the Civil War. All right, the Civil War's not even over yet when this proclamation is issued. Does a Negro have a right to property?
Nope.
According to American history and according to the teachers of Prophet Noble Drew Ali, no, he did not. Why? Because the era of slavery ended in 1865. Not 64, not 63. But these proclamations was issued during that time. So how can you be restored property rights when you never had them under this governmental construct? Okay, so we were educated that this was an oath that Moors needed to take to become citizens. But the more we study this history, the more we come to the realization that this oath is not the key or the doorway or pathway to citizenship. But praise the Lord, there is a remedy. It was mentioned in this discussion, but we're not going to focus on that right now. We're going to just focus on this letter and get through this because, again, we have to end our meeting early today. And I want to get through the entire letter. So let's continue, Mo.
Oh, I'm sorry. You ready?
Islam, Sheik, floor is yours. I mean, not Sheik, Brother Jeff. Sorry. Floor is yours.
Islam. Much gratitude. All right. Except as this, all right, let me just run it back because there's a lot of commas, no period. I, Andrew Johnson, President of the United States, do proclaim and declare that I hereby grant to all persons who have directly or indirectly participated in the existing rebellion, except as hereinafter accepted amnesty and pardon, with restoration of all right of property, except as to slaves, and except in cases where legal proceedings under the laws of the United States providing for the confiscation of property persons engaged in rebellion have been instituted, but upon the condition, nevertheless, that every such person shall take and subscribe the following oath or affirmation, and thenceforward keep and maintain said oath inviolate, and which oath shall be registered for permanent and shall be of the tenor and effect following to wit. I,
Islam. No, wait, hang on. We're going to stop right there. Hold on. Okay. All right. So who is President Johnson speaking to? Who is this proclamation for? Well, he said to all persons directly or who have directly or indirectly. Okay, so you had to directly or indirectly participate in the existing rebellion. Then you can get a pardon. Then you can get the restoration of rights to property, except with slaves. Okay, so former slaves didn't have a right to property. We didn't get a right to property till the end of the resolution of all of this. Okay, actually, we didn't get the right to own property until 1866, to be specific. All right, so property rights were not secured for us prior to this time period. All right, but this is in May, the end of May, 1865, that this particular thing is written. All right, so these are the conditions, and it says every such person. That means a person who falls into this category shall take and subscribe the following oath. Okay, so the oath of amnesty. This is why none of your great grandparents have a copy of this, because it was not administered to you. It wasn't administered to northern citizens who were not in the state of rebellion, and it wasn't administered to former slaves, as far as my research goes. You know, and again, according to the language of the law, it's quite clear who it's being spoken to. But we can read the excerpt. Brother Jeff, you wanted to say something before you read?
Yes, I just wanted to get some clarity. You know, from my understanding, the 1866 Civil Rights Act didn't fully become law to 1870 due to the fact that these same elements from after the Civil War were still going on within government after Andrew Johnson got impeached, from what I was reading. So it didn't become law until 1870, if I'm not mistaken. I just want to make sure I may be wrong. So I'm asking.
Okay, I would say no, but we're gonna look it up real quick. And we're gonna look at Ballotpedia. They're okay. Legislative history.
Yeah, that's the law he vetoed.
He vetoed in 1866. No, it became law in April 9th, 1866, by a vote of 122 to 41. 21 members abstained. It became law. April 6, 1866. So whatever you're reading is incorrect.
Okay, Islam.
All right, please continue.
Okay, I, two blank lines, do solemnly swear or affirm in presence of Almighty God that I will henceforth faithfully support, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Union of the States thereunder, and that I will in like manner abide by and faithfully support all laws and proclamations which have been made during existing rebellion with reference to the emancipation of slaves. So help me God. Did Mr. Douglas take this oath? Question. That's, you want me to continue? Sheik, you want me to continue?
Yeah, hang on one second, Miles. I was trying to grab my charger real quick. Let me just grab this thing. But yeah, so hold on one second. Hello?
Yeah.
Got here? Okay. So that is the text of the oath right there. So that was the actual oath that General Robert E. Lee and a number of individuals who participated in the Sarah Rebellion needed to take in order to restore their citizenship and their rights under the Constitution.
Islam, Sheik.
Islam, man.
Yeah, at the end of this, it says, did Mr. Douglas take his oath? If they ask him, I have a broad question. So the oath, everyone had to take it, not just the rebellion states. It was all.
This is one of those things that, again, we in this temple, the Brooklyn Moors, we're not dogmatic, okay? We're not religious zealots, and just because, we find some type of information in a religious text and we interpret it a certain kind of way, we're not going to allow that to negate our five senses, okay? So if, for example, if our religious book had said something like, something didn't exist, like I don't know, the 10th Amendment doesn't exist or something like that, and we can verify that it in fact does, I'm not going to negate my senses, because then we basically, and not to denounce Christians or other faiths, but we just blind followers at that point. In our Moorish lessons, it teaches us that it's a 3-step ladder: belief, faith, fruition. And so by us climbing those steps, we're able to weed out any information that's not accurate. So when we go before the government and present our findings, we're not presenting religious information, we're presenting actual facts as a religious, corporation. Okay? So, no, this was not an oath that everybody had to take. As we have read in the previous excerpt, this was the president himself saying this.
Yeah, I see. That's why I asked.
You see what I'm saying? So he's saying who is supposed to take this oath. Okay, so why would somebody fighting on side of the Union, or at least not rebelling against the Union, why would they have to take this oath? They never lost their citizenship. They never declared themselves not citizens. They never took up arms against the United States of America. They didn't aid and assist individuals or the military itself that was trying to overthrow the United States of America. They didn't participate in any of that. So why would they take the oath? It doesn't make logical sense. And why would a slave who was not a citizen, who himself didn't participate in a rebellion? Because the rebellion was all about freeing him. He didn't have no rights of property to restore. He had no constitutional rights to restore, period. He'd be gaining constitutional rights for the first time under the Constitution after the era of slavery ends because of these events. All right, so Islam, Grand Sheik.
Islam, and we gotta be mindful though. There were free people of color, free Negroes in the South who owned land and fought in the Confederacy that had state citizenship but not national citizenship, and they participated in the rebellion. So they might have had to take the oath, but it wasn't like the Sheik said. We was taught that everybody had to take the oath, but through our research, we realized that that was incorrect information that was given to us. So it was those who were in the South and who rebelled against the Union States, and it was those free people of color who was in the Confederacy who was property owners and maybe had state rights, state citizenship, to say. As far as like the Negro, the so-called Negro, the slave, and all of that, they would not be. It would be no need for them to take the oath because they're not citizens or those in the North, like the Sheik has stated. With that, I say peace.
Yeah, it's long, Mo. Sorry about that. But yeah, 100%, man, 100%. I'm sorry. Did I cut you off? You still talking, Reggie? Because I don't hear no. I heard you stop.
No, I'm done.
Nah, he did it.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Sorry about that. If y'all hear any background noise, just forgive me for the moment. So yeah. In addition, they would be ones who may prescribe to take that oath. But as the Grand Sheik said, the Constitution, well, he didn't say exact words, but the Constitution protects the rights of only people at that time considered white people or white persons. Okay? So although there were Negroes, or those class, should I say, we know there's no such thing as a Negro, but those classes Negroes who had to gain state citizenship so that they could, be good in their state. But if they travel to another territory, and this is something that did transpire in that particular period, they could be, enslaved, and they're not protected because they're no longer, their protections under the state constitution being state citizens. You would think that would automatically make them federal citizens, but no, it didn't. All right. So, but you have examples of so-called Negroes being citizens of their states at the close of the American Revolution. I believe Justice Douglas, I forget what justice this was, but he was a justice that was on he was one of the dissenting opinions on the Dred Scott case, and he had referenced how there were Moors in five of the original 12 colonies or something like that, something like that, 4 or 5 or something like that. States had Moors as prominent citizens, on record. As Moors, classed as Moors, not as Negroes, but just to understand that, there were melanated people that were citizens as well. So this is not really reference, as you could tell by the oath, it doesn't make reference to, all white persons that did such and such. It made reference to any and everybody, who engaged in a rebellion, So let's continue.
Is long. Certain classes of persons were accepted from receiving the benefit. Certain classes of persons were accepted from receiving the benefit of said proclamation because of their bad conduct. However, on the same day, by issuing another proclamation, President Andrew Johnson took the 4th section of the 4th article of the Constitution of the United States, bound by his solemn oath to faithfully execute the office of the United States and to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, interceding that every state in the Union is guaranteed a Republican form of government and protect each of them against invasion and domestic violence. Continue.
All right, so right there. So I'm on the wrong page. So essentially what that's talking about is Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution. And this is where Lincoln derived his war powers at the time for those proclamations to be law, So this is referencing that particular article and section. So it says, certain classes of persons were accepted from receiving the benefit. And when they say accepted, it's saying EXCEP. I'm sorry, EXCEPTED, accepted, not ACCEPTED. All right, so that's a very important distinction because they were basically not included when he says accepted. EXCEPTED. So certain classes of persons were accepted from receiving the benefit. They weren't included. I don't want to say included, but they found themselves outside of receiving the benefit of said proclamation, before mentioned proclamation, because their bad conduct. So they basically was disqualified because they was continuing on, with their attitudes even after the war was done. The Confederacy already surrendered. You see, to even this day, there's people representing the Confederate flag. So you could understand just how deep those feelings run and ran, but during that particular time, at the height of it, where you got people, with Confederate flags all over the country to this day, right? So Article 4, Section 4 of the Constitution, requires the president to, guarantee every state in the Union a Republican form of government. That's the system of government the United States of America operates under, according to this particular article and section of the Constitution, and protect each of them against invasion and domestic violence. So domestic violence invasion is a foreigner coming into your land trying to take your joint over. Domestic violence is violence at home. That's why, the domestic violence charges the people have is because they fighting in their house, right? Okay, so domestic violence at home will be a civil war. Okay, or domestic violence at home would be, what happened on the Capitol, but they did some violent acts that harm people. You know what I mean? That would be domestic violence. Even when people, a protest may turn to a riot, that's domestic violence. The president has to restore peace according to his oath. All right, let's continue.
It's long. Brethren, the president directed a 7-point plan guaranteeing justice to the South, although he was impeached. But that didn't change the law. It is our desire for you at this point to look in President Abraham Lincoln's proclamations of September 22nd, 1862. You will find an executive will. And in that will, in due time, all slaveholders is to compensate it for all losses by acts of the United States, including the loss of a slave, which is classed as property.
All right, we'll stop right there. Okay, so the September 18, so just to keep it, so people are following that may not know this history, there were numerous proclamations, several proclamations passed during the Civil War pertaining to our freedom and how this government, supposed to administer and treat us. The initial or preliminary proclamation, the very first one, is September 22nd, 1862. All right. And that was the precursor outlining the one that everybody knows about, January 1st, 1863, which they call Emancipation Proclamation. All right. Well, the one that set it up, that explained all the details and when it was going to go into effect, was this one here. And it references the executive will of Abraham Lincoln. Okay. It's very hard for me because I'm not even knowing people are trying to get in. There was somebody else trying to get in. I didn't even notice. All right. So let's look at what a will is. Will in law. Let's take a look at that real quick. All right. Okay. We're just going to look at a legal dictionary. Will, a document in which a person specifies the method to be applied in the management and distribution of his estate after death. A will is the legal instrument that permits a person, the testator, to make decisions on how his estate will be managed and distributed after his death. All right, this is dealing with more like, because his is a specific kind of will, it's an executive will. So his will as the executive or the president. And
it's
so
long.
it's a legal document. Islam?
I have the Black Laws definition and need it.
Okay. Yeah, let's go with that. Let's see if you like it better.
Okay. Law of wills, that's what it's called, is under there. It's the
what will?
Law of wills.
Okay, go for it.
Is under wills too as well. The legal expression or declaration of a person's mind or wishes as to the disposition of his property to be performed or take effect after his death. Another one, revocable instrument by which a person makes disposition of his property to take effect after his death. A written instrument executed with the formalities of law whereby a person makes a disposition of his property to take effect after his death. The constitute will intention must appear that writer by document itself intended to make disposition of property effective only after death.
It's long. So you hear the word property over and over again. Why are they talking about why would it be called an executive will? Why would it be referencing property if it's talking about us, if it's about our freedom and stuff? Well, for the sake of time, it's because we were classed as property. So prior to the Civil War, slaves were private property. Okay? I mean, a person could purchase you and they're a citizen and they can own you, register you in the county, and you know, it's on a record, legal documentation. You belong to this person. And so we were classed as property during this particular time. And then when the Civil War ended, or during that particular period, the government said, listen, we're not returning your property. The government decided to set us free, to emancipate us and set us free. And so in that transition, we were federal property. Because we weren't citizens and we had no other place in the world. That's why they called us freedmen. The bureau, the Freedmen's Bureau is freedmen and refugees. A refugee is somebody who don't got no place to go on the planet. Okay? And that's what we were classed in as law, freedmen and or / refugees. So when the Hurricane Katrina thing happened, and I don't know if it was President Bush or his wife, referred to so-called Black Americans as supposedly citizens as refugees. This was not the first time in American history that we were labeled as such, but this is the first time that somebody who held an official position, be it president or first lady, said something of such remarks publicly. You know, the technology allows us to capture all of these things, and it's very hard for media to suppress information in this Aquarian age, Islam. But for the sake of time, let's continue.
Islam. Sir, our 5 senses teach us that if you buy something, you become the owner of it, and you can dispose of it any way you deem necessary. We say that we as a race are free, but how can we truthfully say that when the executive will have never been carried out?
So let's stop. Let's stop for a second. What is the executive will specifically? Is it just the September 22nd, 1862 proclamation?
Islam.
No. No, it is not. The executive will is President Abraham's legacy of the executive decisions that he made while he was in office. Okay, so should he die, it could be carried out, and it explicitly, these are his, all the proclamations are his words, signed by his signature, and that's why it falls in the executive will. All right, the 13th Amendment with 20 sections is included. Why does it fall in the executive will? Because it's a piece of legislation pertaining to everything that he was doing that he signed off on. Okay, he wasn't assassinated before the 13th Amendment was passed. Actually, let me rephrase that. He was not assassinated before he signed off on the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. He was assassinated. Clearly he was assassinated after he did it. Okay?
Islam, Sheik. There's a definition here about what you're talking about as far as under will too as well. If you don't mind, I would like to read it.
Go for it. It can't be too long though, because we get into the
it's not.
Okay,
It's
go
not.
for it. It's long.
Okay, a will is not a sheet of paper nor a number of sheets of pages, but and the form of an instrument is of little consequences in determining whether it is a will. But if it is executed with formalities required by statute, and if it is to operate only after death of maker, it is a will. Yeah, that's it. Executed with formalities that requires by statute.
So Plan A was him to carry all this out while he was in office. He even postponed the close of the Civil War in order to ensure that the 13th Amendment with 20 sections passed. That was essentially his final major act as president of the United States of America. It was a lasting legacy for him. Okay, so if he had lived, then we wouldn't need to worry about the executive will, because all of the all that he instructed was already carried out, or everything that's within that particular body of legislation was carried out. Then he passes away. Then, you know, it's just a historical reference. You know what I mean? An obscure historical reference that doesn't have any meaning. But the fact that it wasn't carried out, that his will in both meanings, like you got a will to do something, I got a will to succeed, and then a last will and testament, both wills were not carried out. His will is expressed in his will. If you get my drift. All right. So Timothy Dingle-El, he asks, if we free, how can we truly be free if executive will is not carried out, i.e. the laws that freed us are not fully made manifest? The government never fully carried it out. So let's continue.
It's long. But how can we truthfully say that when the executive will have not been carried out? And as long as that is not carried out, we still belong to the slaveholder, their property. And the fourth section of the fourth article of the Constitution of the United States guaranteed to protect a citizen's property. You may try to use the 14th Amendment for protection, but that is useless because the fourth paragraph let the cat out the bag.
So the fourth paragraph, he underlines. He underlines the words "they're useless." I mean, he underlines the words "their property," that we would continue to be the slaveholders' property, because again, the process of us being private property transferred over to federal property and made citizen has not been carried out. They say it's under the 14th Amendment, but thanks to the direction of our Prophet Noble Drew Ali, the original author, we know that the 14th and 15th Amendments are not necessary for the salvation of our people, because the rights of citizenship and voting was already passed prior to the enactment of the 14th and 15th Amendment. Never mind that the 14th Amendment was carried out by unconstitutional means. That's a whole nother demonstration in itself. But he says useless. For them to use the 14th Amendment is useless. And he says at the fourth paragraph let out the bag. Why? Because the federal government, well, actually, can we get that? Who got their constitution in front of them? Let's look at the
I got it.
All right, so let's look at the 14th Amendment, section 4, real quick.
14th Amendment, section 4. 1 second. Section 4. The validity of the public debt of the United States authorized by law, including debts incurred for payment of pensions and bounties for services in suppressing insurrections or rebellion, should not be questioned. But neither the United States nor any state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in the aid of insurrection or rebellion against the United States, or any claim for the loss or emancipation of any slave, but all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void.
It's long. So right there, that's letting the cat out the bag. Why? Because they saying, Southerners, we're going to take your property. We're going to violate the Fifth Amendment. Even though your property is guaranteed and we can't take it without just compensation, we're not going to compensate you. We're not even going to pay you. So constitutionally, the confiscation of the property, which is i.e. our bodies, in the Fifth Amendment, don't coincide unless they pay them for every slave that was taken. And so the South settled on, instead of getting the money, the South settled on having the North abandon the Negro and creating the conditions that make the status quo to keep us on the bottom and keep themselves on the top and manage to enslave us in a different fashion, having us working as slaves in the prison industrial complex in different means, and at the North wouldn't interfere. All right, but it's long.
You could go long if you want. You could go long if you want, because you on.
Yeah, I was going to tell you in a few, like 5 minutes. Like we need a few more minutes just to wrap this up.
Nah, we could go regular time.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna need the whole time, but up until we finish, this next page, we'll finish this page and then finish the next page, and we done.
All right, peace.
Peace. All right, so that was the cat getting let out the bag. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yo, this clearly violates the Constitution, so it's out the bag now. Is essentially what he's saying. So let's continue.
It's long. It clearly states that the slaveholders never got paid for you, making you steal their property. And the only way that you can be free from slaveholders is A, executive will.
Stop right there. Stop right there. He said something important. He's making an assertion. The slaveholder never got paid. And because the slaveholder never got paid, you're not truly free. You steal their property according to law. And we just explained that because the Fifth Amendment doesn't allow for the government to seize property without paying you for it justly. They have to give you a fair value for whatever they take. Okay? And so the government never did that. Not only did they not do it, they put in the amendment itself, we ain't gonna do it. Okay? But the Article 6 of the Constitution makes the Constitution itself the supreme law of the land, the Fifth Amendment being part of the Bill of Rights, which was passed in the 1700s, the late 1700s, 1790 something, or 90 or 91 or something like that.
Islam?
To protect the rights of the citizens. Islam, Mo.
And this is one of the reasons why the KKK was formed, because they was upset because they didn't get paid for their property, so they decided to wreak terror on so-called Negroes because they were angry about that. Peace.
Peace, Islam. And in their minds, the government just stole their property anyway. So that's how they felt. Like they felt like they could just violate us because, of how they were done dirty. Islam.
Wasn't they government men anyway that succeeded and also started the KKK?
No, so the KKK started in 1866. This is at the close of the Civil War. All right. And many of the founding members, the majority, pretty much all of them, were Democrats. All right, the Democratic Party founded the KKK, or members of the Democratic Party founded the KKK. Politics. And so this was after the Civil War, and this was after they seen the direction that the country was going pertaining to our freedom and citizenship. This was their way to lash out at the government, and they wore the hoods to cover themselves so that they would not be held as treasonous or committing any crimes. All right, so let's continue.
Islam. A, the executive will of President Abraham Lincoln must be carried out. B, you become federal property. C, the government will change your status, set you free, and make citizens out of you so you can enjoy the blessings of the Constitution of the United States. And if the government don't do that, you still will be a slave, and Section 9 of Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States will be violated because no slaverism is to be in existence after 1808.
Islam. So the executive will of president. So he's given us certain set of options as to how this could play out and still remain within the constitutional fold, the lawful, lawfully. And that is A, the executive will of Abraham Lincoln must be carried out. And A is obviously the preferable choice and what we're advocating, because why? We don't have to ask them to pass laws. We don't have to ask them to sit down and convene and da-da-da-da-da. It's just carry out the law that was already passed. That's the executive will. With that, give us our citizenship outside of the 14th Amendment. With that, provides our freedom. With that, provides, incentives for, Asiatics to colonize here in the Americas or abroad. And several other features of that particular body of legislation known as the executive will of President Abraham Lincoln constituting compensation as well. Compensation for the slave master because they got to be justly compensated for their property being taken, and compensation for us for the slavery that we performed during that particular period based off of Leviticus 25:10, which the 13th Amendment with 20 sections was codified out of this law, all right, which obligated Hebrews to liberate their slaves. And when they liberate their slaves, they have to compensate them, return them all their properties, send them back to their family, and not empty-handed. And so this is what the conception of the 13th Amendment with 20 sections was born out of. So even the executive will of President Abraham Lincoln is carried out with all the provisions that we just talked about and other things. You become federal property, which happened. We became federal citizens under the 14th Amendment. But the problem, and why a lot of where the sovereign citizen movement came out of, and them challenging the courts and things of that nature, was out of this 14th Amendment because it made Negroes out of everybody. All right, so the European was reduced in status, and then it made Negroes out of everybody through this 14th Amendment. All right, made us all federal citizens and subject to, laws that would have never been able to fly under the body of legislation that was in existence during this time period. All right, or the government is going to one day wake up and say, you know what? All right, man, 220-something years, 230-something years or whatever, that's enough, man. We're going to educate these people, change their status, you know what I'm saying? Set them truly free and allow them to enjoy the blessings of the Constitution. When jig is up, we're not going to do this, charade anymore. And whatever have you. And he made another thing. He said you will still be a slave in Section 9 of Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States will be violated because no slaverism is to be in existence after 1808. Now, I would say spiritually in the Constitution, or the essence of that clause, that was the aim and means as a progression of the elimination of slavery in the United States. But what it expressly prohibits is the importation of slaves. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution. It prohibits the importation of slaves, meaning you can't go outside of the United States of America territory, go capture you some slaves, and then bring them back here after the year 1808. But any slaves that are domestically bred in America as cattle, that's free game. They're not imported. Slavery itself wasn't illegal after 1808 based on this provision. All right, it was just the importation of slaves. But a way around that is what they did, which is they would breed slaves. All right, well, we can't go outside to get more slaves. Well, we'll make them and raise them right here. You know what I'm saying? We breed horses, we breed cattle, we breed goats, we breed chickens, we breed everything else. Go breed this Negro beast and reproduce them, and then we'll have more slaves. And that's how that went. Islam. So let's continue.
Islam?
Islam, Sheik.
Yeah, just to add on real quick. And that's also when they did the shuffle game. Like you said, they couldn't import people, so they may take someone, say, from Barbados and then ship them to New York, or someone from Florida and ship them to Brazil. So, and of course, breed them, just like you said.
Islam. Maybe not Barbados, because that would have been a foreign territory, so that might violate it, but definitely from like Florida or, other territories around the United States, or territories the United States owned, whatever. Islam, Grand Sheik.
No, I was saying.
You breaking up. You breaking up, more. Anybody else hear him breaking up?
No, I was saying that they could take a slave from like Florida to Texas or something, but not to Barbados or Jamaica, and like that'd be violating that particular article.
Yeah, Islam.
All right, peace.
Islam, brother Jeff. Can you continue? You might be muted, Mo, because I can't hear you. Still can't hear you, Mo. Anybody else hear him?
No, he must have stepped away.
No, he's not stepped away. I seen his thing, pop up on the screen.
Yeah, he might have stepped away from his.
Hello.
There he go.
Can you hear me?
It's long.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Can you hear me,
Mo.
Mo?
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
All right. Brethren, the nature of this communication is to assist you in correcting the error and set a better standard than our father, Frederick Douglass, according to the Constitution of the United States, so our generation of today and generations to come will look up to us fathers with honor, pride, and dignity. The question in our mind now is this: would you senators advise us as a race to allow ourselves to be compensated in this new era of time by the federal government so we can become true government property and not slaveholders' property? Would you senators advise us to trust the federal government if the government is willing to change our status, free us, and make citizens out of us according to the true 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and the 20th section and also the Levitical Code?
So stop right there. Stop right there. All right, because this is very important what he's saying. He's asking essentially rhetorical questions. So we're going to go in the order that he's going to, but there we go. He mentions the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. All right. So let's look at this. He says, would you senators advise us as a race to allow ourselves to be compensated in this new era of time by the federal government? Meaning compensated, they got, pay us. Would you allow that? Would you advise us? Not would you allow that, would you advise us to do that? So we can become true government property and not slaveholders' property? Because again, the constitutional mandate will be fulfilled. Well, again, he says, again, they need to be compensated according to the Fifth Amendment for their property, right? This was something that Abraham Lincoln struggled with and why he proposed compensated emancipation in the first place, to get a workaround for that issue, right? And then, the compensation for us was supposed to come through the Freedmen's Bureau. And they had a whole bank set up for us and all of that, which bank numbers still do exist. They said all the money was taken away, but who checked on it? So he says, to allow, would you senators advise us as a race to allow ourselves to be compensated in this new era of time now? This new era of time, huh? Here you go. Sorry about that, Morris. Would you compensate in this new era of time by the federal government, right? So compensation for the slaveholder for their property to fulfill the Fifth Amendment requirement, and then we would no longer be slaveholders' property because they've been paid for their property. The federal government can't take your property under the provision that they paid for it. So once the federal government gives them their money, or at least, makes it available for them to receive, then those private citizens who their property was taken away from have been compensated. Would you senators advise us to trust the federal government if the government is willing to change our status, free us, and make citizens out of us? All right. So if the government is willing to do this, will y'all back this particular, action? Again, would they be willing? He wants to know if the so-called Black Congress will be on board. He wants to know and make citizens out of us according to the true 13th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States and the 20 sections and also the Levitical Code. So he's saying for the federal government to change our status, free us, and make citizens out of us using what? The 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Okay? So he's not saying Frederick Douglass voided the 13th Amendment with 20 sections, because how would he then, in 1972, be able to utilize the 13th Amendment with 20 sections to have the government change our status, free us, and make citizens out of us? It'd be impossible if Frederick Douglass, the Negro, who had some authority we unaware of to void a constitutional amendment, actually did it by not getting with the program or whatever have you, and his actions was able to do that even on that pretense. So why would he suggest using it later on in the same letter to free us? Okay, so the context is very clear. He's talking about the 13th Amendment with 2 sections, 14th Amendment and 15th Amendment, when he's saying that's what they're going by right now. What he's saying is they should be going by the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Forget that 14th Amendment noise. Right? Go to your colleagues in the Senate and say to them, these things. You know what I'm saying? We need to propose a bill to compensate the former slave masters so that these so-called descendants of Negroes can be truly free. And then we need to work on utilizing the 13th Amendment with 20 sections that's already on the books in order to, change our status, free us, and make citizens out of us. That's why I'm saying it's part of the executive will. All right, that was point A on his 3 ABC points. It was point A on page 125. The executive will of President Abraham Lincoln must be carried out. That's this, with the last thing that he's saying, the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. The compensation of the property, this is all provisions. The questions he's asking are all provisions of the executive will, be it in the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, be it the supplemental Emancipation Proclamation, or any other aspects of executive will, including the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Now let's read the next paragraph because it's important, because he's very specific. Islam?
Islam. Please, we are not referring to those articles that was named the 13th Amendment that recorded in the present Constitution. That's only the foundation.
Islam. Let's stop right there. So is that not what I'm saying? He specifically said it. Like, you don't need to interpret his words any other way. He said this 13th Amendment with 20 sections. No, I'm not talking about the one we're using presently. The 13th Amendment we're using presently. He said that's only a foundation. Why does he say that's only the foundation? Because those 2 sections, you could find a language in the 13th Amendment with 20 sections, but there are many more provisions, including the right to vote, the right to peaceably assemble, the right to worship God according to the dictates of our own consciousness. Many things encapsulated in the Bill of Rights is encapsulated in the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Why? Because the Negro didn't have those rights prior to. Okay? And so the slavery except for involuntary servitude, involuntary servitude except for a crime should not be tolerated in the United States, whatever. That's in the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. But they just went with the 2 sections and they didn't go with the rest. He says, so that's what he's saying. That's only the foundation. All right. So what we should be clear on up until this point is that Timothy Dingle-El's idea is to use the executive will of Abraham Lincoln, inclusive of the proclamations and the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Okay. And to go back to the point of him saying that Mr. Douglass voided the 13th Amendment. He didn't void it in any legal capacity. Just through his actions as a spokesman of the so-called Negro, he made it impossible at that time to implement the policy, because you would need the cooperation of the Negro in order to do this. We couldn't be compelled to do this. It had to be something that, again, they couldn't force us to be citizens. You understand? This had to be a voluntary process. And so perhaps Frederick Douglass's distrust in government at that time, but in any case, he wanted to change trajectory the next year, according to Timothy Dingle-El, but he was unsuccessful, clearly based on the status quo, the current events. All right, so let's continue. Oh, wait, let me just finish that thought. So he didn't void it legally he voided it in terms of the context of how he's saying it. You know, maybe a different choice of words would have made it more clear. But from my understanding, gathering the entire contents of the letter and not just that excerpt, he voided it through his uncooperation, not in an illegal capacity. It's long. Let's continue.
It's long. It is not our desire for no lawmaker of our race to void the content of this communication.
Stop
Like
right there. So he says, he used that word void again. So you can understand, he used it once in a legal sense. And I believe it was the third paragraph. Or was it the second paragraph? It was in the, I would say the second whole paragraph. He introduces with one sentence, and then the second whole paragraph, he says that the 13, 14, 15 amendments was void by the court. But then he uses the context with Frederick Douglass, and then he uses it in the context again with the senators. This is a communication that he's just writing a letter to them. This is not no legal document that's imposed on the United States of America. He's trying to convince them. He's trying to sway them to act on behalf of our people with this body of knowledge that he submitted in a smaller pamphlet. Okay? And so they can't void it in the legal context because it's not being proposed. First off, they the so-called Black Caucus, they only part of the Congress. They're not the whole Congress. They don't constitute the whole vote. Therefore, they don't constitute the full capacity to execute this. All right? It's just that they of our race. So he's trying to convince them. So how would they void it? By ignoring him or by flat out denying what he's saying. That will void the content of this communication. This communication, not this law, not this, supreme grand ruling or any of that nature, just this communication, just this letter, they will avoid it. So we have to put things in the context, and we have to analyze the totality of the body of a writing to appreciate and completely coherently understand the context of what's being said. And then we need to look at, sources outside of whatever documentation we're looking at to validate and verify the accuracy. All right, because this is called Moorish science. This isn't called Moorish belief. And so as scientists, we looking at it, from a scientific approach. And so if we find a typo in one of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali's writings, or a typo in Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL's writings, or something that is written down on the document, but it's not, 100% accurate, whatever, we're not throwing out our prophet and our leaders, and we have to operate, because when we sit across from the Europeans, and not necessarily just Europeans, but just administrators of the government, we have to be accurate in what we're saying in order to compel them to do what is required by law. We have to be cognizant of what the law details, and we can't add in stuff, right? And we would be disadvantaged to take out stuff that benefit us. And so we need to follow the trail. The Prophet Noble Drew Ali left the trail, and Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-El and his brother Grand Sheik Richardson Dingle-El, they added on pieces of a trail. And the book, The Resurrection, its intent is for Moors to really understand the psyche and the thinking and the pathology of Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-El in a more in a larger format than a small little pamphlet that's very hard to encapsulate all ideas. And this is the way he was able to expound upon the teachings of the Prophet Noble Drew Ali through various, studies of a documentation, as we're doing in this day and time, in order to grasp a full comprehension of what's left to us. We're close to the conclusion, and our main understanding of what page Timothy Dingle-El was on is being established. It's been established for the most part. But let's just wrap up this document.
Is long. It is not our desire for no lawmaker of our race to void the content of this communication, like our father Frederick Douglass done during his administration. If your answer is yes, then please
under the law free our minds, our soul and spirit. Anyway, you lawmakers deem necessary because the Negro problem is being solved only as it can. You may attain a better understanding by reading the book titled The Radical Republican and the Reconstruction, 1861 to 1870, edited by Harold M. Hyman. We are servants of humanity.
Yeah, just finish up. Go ahead. It's cool.
Okay. We are servants of humanity. Sincerely, the Chamber, Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL, Supreme Grand Field Commander. CCC to the spokesman for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, CCC to the Grand Body, CCC to the Secretary of State, Chicago, Illinois, and CC to Washington, D.C. Islam.
Islam. All right. So at the end of this communication to the members of Congress of the so-called Black Caucus, Grand Sheik Timothy Dingle-EL refers to two pieces of literature. Okay. The first piece of literature is the Radical Republican, and the second is Reconstruction 1861 to 1870. So where he's talking from, if you haven't looked at these pieces of literature or at least studied this period, 1861 to 1870, the laws, the who's who, what they did, what their stance was, you know, what were the major events that precipitated and, you know, subsequently occurred, like some of the things that he's saying is not going to make sense. But us Brooklyn Moors, you know, for a number of years now, have been diligently studying not only our Moorish lessons, you know, our Moorish Quran, our 101s. We also been studying the Resurrection book. You know, we've been studying the Moorish literature, and we've been studying scholastic sources. We've been in the records of the government to come to the conclusions that we've come to. And, you know, obviously we've even sought, you know, education in this area to better understand, you know, what the record reflects and what have you. But right now, I just want to open the floor for Moors if they want to add on, ask questions, and get further clarity before we close out our meeting in a few minutes. Islam? So to kind of compound on real quick, and more, any more, you feel free to interrupt me if you have a comment or concern. I just want to kind of keep it flowing for a second. This thought just popped in my head. To make it real clear, you know, we had teachings about President Andrew Johnson that kind of conflict with our understanding of history. But I want to kind of coincide those teachings to make it make sense. Again, you know, President Andrew Johnson reaffirming the oath of amnesty and reconstruction passed under the President Abraham Lincoln shows that he was making some type of effort to implement the policies of the president, because he didn't have to reissue this proclamation and afford people the opportunity to restore themselves and carry out that portion of the executive will of Abraham Lincoln. And so in that regard, he did make that attempt. And so he should be credited for that. But he also got in the way of the progress of our freedom, you know, later on, which ultimately led to his impeachment. He vetoed the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which was to provide us a lot of rights that didn't exist prior to. And you know, the Congress at the time decided to impeach him, but he wasn't removed from office. I mean, we went through this whole demonstration. I don't know if we put it up online yet. Probably one of the previous videos Brother Jeff had referenced before. But we went through the whole process of impeachment and how that goes to be, you know, when we're doing the current events and when Trump was being impeached. And being impeached doesn't mean being removed, because Trump was impeached twice, as we explained, but he never was removed from office. Okay? So, but that was the motivation behind impeaching Andrew Johnson. He was not an ally to the so-called Negro. He wasn't an ally to the so-called North or the abolition movement or anything of that nature. He was more aligned with the Southern interests. But this is precisely why he was put in position to become the vice president of President Abraham Lincoln, because he brought balance to the force, if you will. Because by having a man, representing the interests of the North or the Union of, so-called Negroes, but then also having a man who is not going to sell the South out. The Southerners know he loyal to the South. He from the South. He represent the people in the South and all of that. And, he's not going to be resistant to their, he's going to be sympathetic to their plight and their interests going forward. And so that's why they wanted him as vice president. And this was something of a political diplomatic move on behalf of President Abraham Lincoln to heal the wounds of the nation. Okay. And so if you wonder why in his 4 years in office, not his 4 years, but the continuation of his tenure in office, he didn't complete, the work of the president, is because, again, you have the resistance of Frederick Douglass. So so-called Negro don't even want this. You know what I mean? And that could kind of fuel or motivate a person to say, even a Negro don't want this. Why am I going to waste my time putting it in? And they don't even want this, man. You know what I'm saying? See, y'all try to force this on a Negro. Y'all try to force freedom on them. Y'all try to force citizenship on them, and they don't even want it. And that would justify, him aligning, with the forces of the South, who continue to fight covertly, politically, in order to restore the Negro to a subservient state through various different forms. And so implementation of black codes and stuff like that, the Civil Rights Act was to protect against that type of stuff and things of that nature. But I'm gonna close out on that point, and I'm gonna leave a moment for Moors to, if they want to participate and say something, ask a question. Otherwise, we're gonna close out the meeting now. So, floor is open.
Islam, I just wanted to camel back off to Andrew Johnson. During that time also, it was, the end of the Civil War or whatever. And they was letting, they was doing the oath of amnesty. So he was pardoning a lot of his own people. There was a lot of strife still in Congress at that time too, behind the war. But the people he was pardoning was causing issues within government, all the way to the impeachment. Islam.
Yeah, Islam. Yeah, but when that oath of amnesty was administered, it's not about who you choose. It was given to all those who was in rebellion in the South, whether they had a problem with it or not. He couldn't pick who and choose who he wanted to give that oath to. You know what I'm saying? But if they didn't get paid for their property, wouldn't you be mad or be mad too? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, it was a whole conspiracy, the great conspiracy. With that, I say peace. But I want to say, Sheik Amir did an excellent job, because I know some of y'all might have read that page before, or didn't and never read it before. But he definitely just gave you the whole explanation of that particular page. So it's like that was a blessing in itself, because I know some more read it, they wouldn't really got that full understanding like he demonstrated, because he went to other sources to corroborate with the information within the book, to get a clear understanding that the Supreme Grand Resurrector, Grand Sheik Chief Supreme Timothy Golden Dingle-EL, was on point 100%. You know what I'm saying? And we have to be able to stand on the resurrection book, because that's the authority on a federal level in this day and time. You know what I'm saying? So with that, I say peace.
Islam, peace. I mean, without that book, The Resurrection, we wouldn't have literally no understanding of this. And so us personally, us Brooklyn Moors here, we understand that the oral statements and prophecies are no different than hadith, and we have no way of verifying whether the Prophet Noble Drew Ali made alleged statements or not. But one particular prophecy within that text states that the Prophet Noble Drew Ali has said that it would take Moors 50 years to figure out what he brought. And that particular statement was alleged to be made in 1928. Timothy Dingle-El published this book in 1978, a full 50 years after the Prophet Noble Jew Ali made that prophecy allegedly. And that book essentially reveals the depth of Act 6, the master degree within Act 6, explaining the era of slavery and going into the body of laws that specifically ended the era of slavery, and how that body of law is a part of the Constitution which the Prophet Noble Jew Ali advocates for, that we can utilize for our full and actual freedom and recognition of our ancestry as Moorish Americans and true citizens of the United States of America outside of the 14th Amendment, which our Prophet Noble Jew Ali established to us, is not necessary for the salvation of us as a whole. And again, you don't need the 15th Amendment if you have a 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Why? Because in the 13th Amendment with 20 sections secures the right to vote, to cast a free national ballot at the ballot box. So what we need a Voting Rights Act for? What do we need a 15th Amendment for? It's already secured in 1865 under the 13th Amendment with 20 sections. Islam. All right, Islam, Moore's floor is still open, but the opportunity is fading fast. Islam.
Islam, Sheik, I just want to say great demonstration as usual. Thank you for your service.
Islam, Muslim, no doubt. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I second that.
Islam, brother Taylor L. Appreciate it, man. We're gonna put it up. I know you kind of caught the tail end of it, but we're gonna put it up, and you'll be able to get the pieces that you didn't get to catch. But I definitely appreciate you, Muslim.
Islam, you too.
Well, Islam was at this time, we're gonna close out our meeting. There's some other affairs Moors need to attend to. We just definitely wanted to have a meeting, to have something of substance for the Moors. I know we had to cancel last week. We were handling some very important business that, in our view, the Moorish movement, the future of the Moorish movement depends upon. And so that's something that will be revealed at a later date, at a later time. But we're definitely hard at work. I want to let that be known, Muslims. Anyway, y'all navigate well. All you Moors be safe. I'm in the recording now. Oh, actually, we're going to have Sheik Muhammad close out our meeting officially with the Moorish American prayer in the recording. And you Muslims can enjoy this beautiful Sunday afternoon. Peace.
Islam, the Holy Quran of the Moorish Science Temple of America. Know yourself and your Father God Allah, that you may learn love instead of hate. Every man needs to worship under his own vine and fig tree, the uniting invasion, Islam. We're going to close our meeting as we begun with the Moorish American prayer. I ask everyone face east. Repeat at a 45-degree angle, 5 up on the left, 2 up on the right. Repeat after me. Allah, the Father of the universe, the Father of love, truth, peace, freedom, and justice. Allah is my protector, my guide, and my salvation, by night and by day, through His holy prophet, Jew Ali. Ameen. Peace and love, Moors. Navigate well. Have a blessed week. Islam.
You too. Peace.